All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of The World Can Wait. Thank you guys for being here with us. We're excited to come back with some more dope conversations need to be had. So to kick things off tonight, we are going to be talking about education. It's we're in a interesting part of our lives right now where with the change of the presidency, we're also seeing a change in education. A lot of people are happy about that. Some people not so much happy about it, but I feel like it brings up a good conversation. What issues do we have in our education system? What things need to be changed? What things need to stay the same? What have your experiences been? So we want to just do a conversation on that tonight, just to get some perspective from a few of our guests that have different walks of life, but all has something to do with education. So just doing a quick little introduction of who all we have here. We're joined by David Keller, who is a special education teacher at Alta Vista Combined. We're also joined by Miss Lakeisha Anderson, who is an administrator at an elementary school, and we're joined by Kenneth Monsanto, who is an entrepreneur and an author. So thank you guys for being here so much. Um, and I guess without further ado, let's kick things off. Charles will open us up in prayer, and we're just gonna get right into it.
Oh, Jesus, we just thank you for an opportunity to come together and have some conversation, share, and some perspective on what it means to have an education, to give an education, and to just be educated. God, we know that the school systems that we've been a part of, for better or for worse, brought us to this point. So I just pray that in this conversation, we would kind of get to the heart of whatever issues we would have and share some perspective that would help people um, make the change that they want to see in their school system. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen, amen. Okay. So first thing, which if you're following us on TikTok, you might have seen the TikTok that we did about this particular thing. Let's start talking about standardized testing as it relates to the students, how it affects them, how as educators we may or may not feel that it's useful or not useful, what can be changed about it, what should stay the same. Let's just get into it. Let's just talk and see where we all stand on that. David, how about we start with you? How are you feeling about standardized testing?
So my perspective is a little bit being molded right now. Like I've got some very angry perspectives of it, which I'll kind of share, just which I'm also realizing are a bit more of ignorance. I grew up in a private school, and so my standardized testing was more accreditation based when I was younger. It was interesting. They were called SATs because I went to an ACSI school, which is like a private Christian organization. And the SATs literally like we knew meant nothing. It just determined whether we learned something that year and had nothing to do with whether we passed or failed. So that was my experience when I was younger. And then throughout college, I was trying to be music ed, and now I'm in the SPED more recently. So I will say that like it's mostly I've just done hearsay from standardized testing, but now as a teacher in the last few years of grad school, studying it more specifically, I'd say my opinion of them is kind of it's interesting. The only time I've really experienced them is so far making curriculum, which I find them kind of frustrating. At least I'm in Virginia, and the Virginia SOLs, they kind of annoy me because something we talk about in special education a lot is that each part of learning is a skill set, and test taking is a specific skill set. So I co-teach math, and let me show an example of like how we'll teach in the classroom compared to how it'll show up like as an SOL, and then it'll show up on the SOL test. But in the SOL stands for standards of learning. I make my curriculum with my co-teachers off the SOLs, and the test is called an SOL. So I'll try to keep those distinct because they do get confusing at times. So we're teaching something like lines on a graph, and we're using the equation y equals mx for that, for proportional relationships where m changes. And we mostly teach the letter m. We'll sometimes change it. And then all of a sudden, but like the kids know and memorize y equals mx. On the test that we were made when pulling SOL questions, all of a sudden they're seeing a lot of questions like y equals rx, y equals lx, y equals dx, like m equals something else, and like y and x changes, and it's like The SOL that we based our curriculum off didn't change the letters, but the testing all of a sudden did. I work with some students that have either reading disabilities or other things, and that can confuse them. And now they're no longer showing math skills, they're showing test taking skills. Another example was being in a civics class and seeing some things where it's like, if I can get a student that's very concrete, let's just say, for example, on the spectrum where they're very, very cut and dry, and we ask them, local government does X, Y, Z. And then we describe, like, what would a local government do? Would they pave roads? Would they do this or would they do that? And you're giving them options, which are like, I'll describe bastardizations of what we taught them. They're all of a sudden getting confused because they're looking for certain answers that they studied for based off the study guides, which gave them a variety. But I feel like the tests I've seen are designed to make kids be good test takers and be able to like critically think about the test. Because I got students that can, in my mind, pass their IEP goals and see, and they're doing well, but then they're getting like 40s and 30s and 50s on tests. But like, if I talk to them, they can very concretely tell me and maybe even walk me through it. So that's kind of my opinion. Again, I preface the beginning just because I'm new to it. So I've only seen 2 years as a para, being in teaching a civics class, which in Virginia is an SOL at the end of the year. And now writing stuff with math. It's very interesting that, like, I don't know, me personally, I'm a pretty good test taker. I've only failed a couple tests in college. I was one of those guys, and Dom's had class with me where I show up to class, look on YouTube the entire time, don't do the homework, don't study, roll up to the test and and then graduate, or roll up to the test and take a D and like get a D. And like, I have no idea what's happening, but I can figure out tests well enough that I didn't have to study. No idea what the heck I was given answers for, but I just knew the ones that, like, all right, so like, I wasn't good at that content, but I could take the test. And so that's kind of how I feel. We're challenging kids on different abilities. And the old joke, we're teaching kids how to fill in bubbles, is kind of how I feel at times. And sorry, that was a bit long-winded. It's just kind of one of those frustrating things of like, I want to teach my kids to get it. If I have a kid with a reading disability, I want to read the answer in a way that they can get it, but I can't read that out loud and I can't give them any hints. So if my student has trouble like with vocab recall, and the test is putting words that I didn't get a chance to work with them with because I'm not allowed to see the test until it's taken, they're gonna fail, because you're tricking my students who are already working harder than some of their classmates to begin with. And that's, and I'm not even including the ones that aren't receiving services or 504s. So,
as I'm listening to you speak, I was thinking about what I was thinking about earlier, which was like, I don't really recall too many people, and especially teachers, really taking the time to help me understand whenever I had questions. Like, one of the reasons that this platform exists, one of the, I guess, kind of quirkiest things that a lot of people don't get about me is, I ask a lot of questions because sometimes people say things and they think they're saying them in a way that's clear and understood, and I just don't get it. And so I'm like continuing to ask until I get it. And I learned very early on that nobody was really going to take the time to explain to me. So I might as well just figure out how to do the formulas to pass the test, like you were saying. And I think that's really interesting. And I would like to hear from you, Kenneth, as a student, like, what was it like for you with the whole standardization system and the test and trying to just do it this way, get it done, pass, go, whatever?
It's so funny because my view is all over the place because, school has been, I gave school hell, from first grade to when I stopped going. But I do see that. I think that the standardized test, man, I think that it doesn't say anything, it doesn't really speak to individuals' learning styles, where me as an adult is where I found out, how do I learn? I just found out how I receive things and learn in the last 7 years of my life, where a lot of times in school, I feel like I wasn't even presented the options or the tools to win, So it's like with the standardized test, from early on, I don't remember ever taking them serious, where school for me, second grade is when I checked out. Remember, I'm done. I'm not doing it. isn't going to be something that I take serious. So it was like going through the motions when I was president, or when whatever I had going on, I might go through the motion, but I never was given the tools by any. I remember third grade, actually. Third grade, Miss Barnes. She was the only teacher that I remember. I learned multiplication that year. I learned things. That's the only year in school I learned anything. That's the only year I learned anything in school, third grade. But I had a teacher that was intentional in teaching us our learning styles. I remember she would take time with everybody. She would explain it on the board. She would talk out loud to us. She would take us through quiz. She was very intentional in giving us that. And with my behavior, at the time, if anybody couldn't do that, and anybody wasn't as perceptive and in the place of understanding the real responsibility of a teacher, So I think that test, man, I think that it's just that. It's something that schools can or superiors can decide if you're doing what you're supposed to do. It just gives them a gauge, like, well, they passed this many percent say they can do this. Other than that, it's good for funding to me. That's what I think it's about. I think tests are for funding. I don't think that's for us,
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, of course.
Please,
Okay.
please do.
So I think the first thing we have to understand is the purpose of standardized testing, and understand that it's an evolution. It has gone through an evolutionary process. The standardized tests that you may remember as children, the ITBS, the SAT-9, those types of assessments, were simply nationally normed tests that were designed to gauge an entire nation in determining what level children were functioning at, whether it was math skills or whether it was reading. And so what you have seen over the last, let's say, 10 years, maybe the last 2 decades, right? You've seen a change in what the standardized test looks like. Kenny, you alluded that it's based on funding. A lot of it has to do with funding, because those test scores are used to determine where the needs are in those communities and what states have greatest needs. And so federal funding is associated with 2 distinct acts, Title I and then IDEA. And both of those are based on how they meet the needs of those students in those particular areas. So yes, they do use the test results to determine where the funding should go. And of course, we could debate equity versus equality in regards to funding of low income districts versus higher income districts. However, you will see now that standardized tests are more encompassing that learning style that Kenny talked about. They're going to have performance-based items. The test stems don't look the same anymore. It's no longer just fill in the blip. Did you get, what was the letter of the day? Was it C? I remember as a kid, it's like, if you don't know, guess, right? Take an educated guess. I would just pick C is going to be my letter for the day. When in doubt, put C, right? But any question I didn't know, I would just put C. And, you got a, 25% chance of getting it right at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's random in that regard, and you really can't determine. I, as a teacher, this is not my first rodeo as an administrator. I started out as a paraprofessional, from a paraprofessional to a teacher, from a teacher to an academic coach, from the academic coach to the administrator. Okay, so I've seen from the very, very front line all the way to the office. And so what I do know is I've seen a student sleep the entire test, wake up. We kept trying to wake him up, woke him up. Maybe 10 minutes before the test was over, he simply picked up his pencil, bubbled in whatever he thought, 1 through 35. And guess what? This was a student that I had already done the paperwork to retain, yet he was able to pass because he passed the test. Okay. But since that time, since No Child Left Behind, which was implemented with George Bush, we've now seen a more aggressive look at standardized testing. So now you have a click and drag. Now you have performance, like New Jersey has a performance-based assessment that determines their children actually have to complete tasks in order to determine their level of mastery. It's no more, can you pick the right answer? Now show me what you can do. And so the problem I see with standardized testing is that we oftentimes use it as the only data point. Okay, it is the only indicator to determine whether or not a child is proficient. That can't be. There cannot be just one data point to determine a child's entire school year of proficiency. And so now you're going to see things like in some districts, they have SLOs, which are student learning objectives. And you're going to get an SLO in math, in reading, science, and social studies, but you're also going to get it in art, in music, and physical education, and health. So it encompasses the entire content as well as all of the learners. And so I think when we look at standardized testing in isolation, yeah, you can see the negative components. But when you look at what it provides educators, it gives us a baseline. We can't teach children if we don't have baseline data, right? We want to meet them where they are, but in order to do that, we have to first know where that is. And so it's like throwing a dart at a dartboard. Like, you might hit the bullseye, but statistically, you probably won't the first time, right? So you want to make sure that you're as intentional, like Kenny alluded to his teacher, as intentional in your instructional practices as possible. And that's the expectation that I have for my teachers. But I can't ask them to do that unless they have the data that will allow them to make those intentional decisions, lesson planning, and disaggregating or deconstructing standards. That is a process. That is a skill set just for a teacher alone. Okay, to take a standard and then take it apart and say, what does this really mean? So like David said, he got students that have learning disabilities who are very specific about their learning. They know it's black and white. The gray area is what we teach, okay? And so there's a big difference in just taking a test and actually understanding the content. See, mastery and tests, being able to pass the test, they're two different things. And so we often, parents, and in our country, we confuse those two things. We think, well, they didn't pass the test, they definitely don't know what they're talking about. But like David said, he could talk to one of his students and they can almost walk him through, and actually they can give him examples. Guess what? That's the highest level of Bloom's, right? A Bloom's taxonomy, where you can actually teach somebody else what you know. And so we have to stop asking kids, what do you think is the best answer, versus tell me why that answer is wrong. Because see, if you can tell me why a wrong answer is wrong, then you can tell me what the right answer is. And so that happens not on the test, that happens in the instructional practice. That has to happen in the classroom when teachers are teaching. They have to be able to turn that around so that our students are able to verbalize and articulate and actually now write. That's something that our kids are deficit. And so now our standardized tests, they also include a writing component, which is very important because some of you express yourselves better in writing, right? You probably could write much better than you could do, maybe. So it gives them an opportunity to express their level of understanding and their content knowledge in different ways. So when we use it in isolation, yeah, I could see the negative connotation. But when we use it as just one data point that we use to bring children to a level of mastery and to increase academic achievement, I think it's a great tool to use in conjunction with everything else.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I was thinking about that is like whenever I'm writing IEP goals, Virginia has something called the MAPS, which is the measure of academic performance. Like I said, I'll admit I'm in my first year of teaching, so I don't know if anyone else has that stuff.
We
so
take math as well in Georgia. We take
Oh,
math.
awesome. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to be a band director for 5 years, and then I was a para. Realized I was not doing well in music ed, had a kid throw a desk and went, this is kind of entertaining. And so I started working more in special education because I enjoy this and I'm better at it. So my knowledge of SPED is still like growing. But one of the things that I like about my grad school stuff at University of Lynchburg is like when I'm writing goals, like how I collect the data for it has to be like, well, because I think something to clarify, there's like standardized tests and then there's standardized assessments. Where the map is an assessment, it's not something used to pass. It literally shows me where it's at. As a drumline instructor, one of the things I realized I was doing assessments throughout the years, which is like walking up to a kid and say, "Hey, play this part for me." Or in a classroom, it's like, "Hey, I'm going to give you some questions. I want to see where you're at." Kid scores 2 out of 5 on 4 out of 5 trials. And I'm like, all right, kid really struggles with this. And he struggles with this one facet. I think it's like whenever I'm writing IEP goals, I've seen some from other IEPs I've read or heard my coworkers talk about where it's literally just an SOL standard, like copy and pasted. And then I look at their MAPS data and it's like, that's their weakest. So he tosses a goal, but it's like, then they don't even do it the next year. Or it's a topic that's not going to be covered for like a broad thing. And so sometimes I feel like another reason that there's a negative connotation of testing data is I don't want to say like laziness amongst teachers because we've got so much to do. I think it's sometimes like we don't even truly get properly taught how to interpret some of the data. Because I know for like some of the SOL stuff in Virginia, they don't tell us the questions that are coming. So like we could like, all right, what if this year they hit local government more? What if this, or like for civic, what if they hit executive branch more this year? So it's like we could know and make it for the test, but you have to cover everything. And then we're just looking at the answers. It's like, oh, they got this score. Then the student just thinks, oh, I got a 65%. It's like, well, you actually got 100% of this one section right. But like, we don't get that sometimes, or we have to interpret the raw data so specifically. And so I think it's one of those, there is a lot and higher calling. I know on me, because I like data. So I'm kind of excited for once I do that stuff, but I'm a weird nerd like that, to like break down and find out like where a kid is specifically. So like I can give him those opportunities and support systems for that. But I think, like I said, I think that there's some good benefit. I do find interesting. I know Dom mentioned politics. I actually personally don't have a lot of faith in this current administration to do anything about it, because if there was ever a year to talk about blowing up standardized testing and start from the bottom, it should have happened 6 months ago, and it should have been happening immediately with Corona and stuff, with education just being different. But No Child Left Behind was there for Bush, Obama, and all throughout Trump. And at least personally as a teacher, I don't see anything happening, just because like, you know, it's one of those, I think it's people in education are scared to do things different, because like if we want to do things that are effective for the students, we have to, I at least I'm seeing things in like friends of mine that struggled through public school, dropped out of high school, dropped out of college because they couldn't do it. To address some of these issues, it's like a ground up rework in America that I wish people weren't as lazy to address, or just say, this is the way I did it. Like my school building that worked well in the 70s. Why do I want to rebuild it nowadays? It's like, well, because it's falling apart. We should address and fix things with the times, not just say it worked for me back in the day, so why not touch it now? So that's, yeah.
Well, David, let me just share with you just.
Yes, ma'am, go for it.
No Child Left Behind, 2002, Bush administration. ESSA, Every Student Succeed Act, the revamp in 2015. And now we're looking at yet another administration. So we went from Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education, who was an educator himself, who had a different perspective and a different lens, to a Betsy DeVos, who had absolutely no lens at all, who did not really understand. In this last administration and that just left was under Betsy DeVos's watch. And so she was unable to suspend standardized testing for the year. So I'm looking forward, honestly, me personally as an educator, I'm looking forward to seeing what the new administration will do underneath the new Secretary of, I think his name's the Cardenas, because he too was an ed teacher and a principal. And so now the Secretary of Education, so his lens is even different. So I think a lot of times the perspective on standardized testing is based on the lens. One of the things as an administrator, I encourage my teachers to do when they speak with parents, this is where the education piece really comes in, because parents are watching and listening to other parents and non-educators. So my teachers are instructed to make sure that parents understand that there will be multiple data points throughout the academic year. This is not the only piece of data that we will use to assist their children. We also have to understand that there's a difference between an assessment for learning and an assessment of learning, okay? And so the assessment for learning is what goes on day in day in the classroom. Informal and formal assessments that the teachers either create or administer. The MAP is one of those assessments for learning, but it is actually used as a tool to assist us in determining where the student is, what criteria they're meeting, where they're excelling. Because here's the thing, I don't want my teachers to teach to the test. I don't want my teachers to teach the test. I want my teachers to teach my students the content. And if you adequately teach the content, the test should not be an issue, because the test is based on what? Content. And so as teachers struggle, some teachers struggle with understanding what exactly the curriculum is asking of them, right? So we're in a paradigm shift where we're actually assisting teachers now in learning how to, again, deconstruct those standards, understand what A over B actually represents and what type of examples you should be giving your students in the classroom so that they can see both examples and non-examples. So yes, it's going to have to go back to the intentionality that Kenny spoke about with his third grade teacher, where teachers are going to have to intentionally focus on the deficits of their students based on the data that they've collected throughout the year and use that to facilitate learning, teaching and learning as they prepare for the standardized test. What we have seen in the last 2 years is a whole harmless year. In my particular state, we've not had to use our tests, our state scores to determine promotion. But guess what? Even in that, even though the government is saying you need to have some type of formal assessment to determine the proficiency of your students, parents ultimately still have the right to determine whether or not their students progress. Okay, so I have a student in my school building, he's a 5th grader, he takes the state test, he bombs, right? The recommendation based on the test, right, on the test is that he what? Be retained. How, guess what? His mom comes in over the summer, she receives the scores, she says, I don't want my child retained. I think he's quite capable for middle school. And guess what? That child is then placed in the 6th grade, okay? So as much as we put the hammer on the standardized test, it is still just one measure, and it is not the end all and begin all for a child's success. Now, let's roll back, because some of that is the responsibility of the parent. Let's start there. Educating your children starts at home, right? Our children don't have a set place to study. They don't have a bedtime. There are a lot of different factors that play into the success of a student over time. Kenny said he had some academic challenges and some behavioral challenges, right? So that takes a different type of lens for the teacher, because first she has to get past his behavior challenges before she can even address his academic challenges. And most of the times his behavior is based on his trust of the person. He didn't really have a good time in 1st grade. He said he checked out. By 2nd grade, he was really done. And then 3rd grade, here comes this lovely lady, and somehow or other she got his attention. But I would be remiss. I would like to know from Kenny, what did she do? What did she say? And how was her intentional instruction so that it taught you that you wanted to learn that year? You wanted to learn your multiplication facts. I just want to know that, because that's really where it starts.
I mean, I think she did everything. I think that it was just more of her all around command for respect and just how she presented everything, where it was more of a, I don't want to say a mother vibe, but she just had that healthy balance of authority and love at the same time. She had a real healthy balance of that. And then she was intentional with, when she taught us, we would learn like something on the Magic School Bus. She'd put it on the board, and she'd make a game out of the same thing that she just taught us.
So she made it like fun for you.
I would say fun, and she just made sure it was, you had several different ways to grasp the same concept. So if you didn't get it this way, you would get it this way. If you didn't get it this way, you didn't get it, where that's how, like, it was very she just really was intentional with making sure you got it. Everybody, 3rd grade, everybody around us enjoyed Magic School Bus. So, it was, that's the thing. So we watched that, we'd play a game. Then she'd have us go to the board. And like I said, her whole approach was very, Miss Barnes wasn't playing no games, what I mean?
At all.
She wasn't. But she was fair though. It was equality. Nobody was treated differently. She really had integrity. And I think that's a skill set that, we look at our educators, our police officers. It's certain jobs, man, that you really just can't have a bad day, but you got to leave your feelings on the pillow, especially when so much is at stake, when so much is at stake, you have to leave your emotions on the pillow. And a lot of teachers, I fought with my wife last night. So, man, everybody going to detention today. You know what I mean? Like for real, like, it can go, and it's just like, and we're not even going to talk about when police officers have a bad day. We're not even going to talk about that. But as far as our educators, man, I feel like just because it's like, where it's almost unbelievable the impact that they have on you, especially looking back as an adult. wow, like, damn, this person did this or this person did this, where, you know, that's a responsibility, man. That's a big power. And that's what responsibility is. Power, you know. That's our problem with a lot of people in power, because all power is responsibility, you know. But in order to have these responsibilities as teachers, like Miss Barnes, you have to be whole. You have to have integrity. You know, like it's like that equality. It can't be you know, it was a lot of foolishness. And like I said, I was just one of those individuals who I made it easy for adults to make me a target because of my behavior already. So it was like, even if I was being lied on, which I was all the time, you know, I'm acting crazy. And I'm like, yo, I'm like, yo, she's lying. But I made so it was a perpetual cycle. It was a perpetual cycle. And by that time, I already was, man, it don't even matter anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What
Do you
I hear
feel
you
like-
though, go ahead. I'm sorry, Charles.
Oh, I was gonna, I'm listening to you, and I wonder, do you feel like, the class size impacted the way teachers engaged you? Do you feel like if you had more of not necessarily a one-on-one, but if you were in a smaller class where you were the teacher probably would have felt like they had more attention to give to you as a difficult student? Because, I think back over my time in school, and I think about a lot of different things, but the two things I'm thinking about right now is, one, how many teachers I don't remember because like they were just there. And then two, how many teachers I remember that didn't really like do the work in making sure that they taught me more or less, so how do you feel like the class size has impacted the way that you were educated and the kids that you were in class with? How do you feel like that happened? Kenneth, yeah.
You. As far as the class size, bro, I mean, now it's and that's a question that I kind of ask myself. Like I'm constantly reflecting over my life, to be honest, as far as, and not in a place of, oh, what if I would have done this, but just for more or less understanding, and it's like, where it's like now I spend maybe 70% of my day taking in information, whether it be podcast, Audible, or actively reading, where it's something that I love to do naturally. It's something that I do literally all day. And I'm like, yo, how wasn't I informed in the power of education? I wasn't informed in the value of it, and I don't think that it was properly presented to me. And as far as the class, like I said, I mean, I can't really speak from a place of like I was tapped in, because, like in class, I was just a distraction, bro. Like, I mean, I'm in that joint banging, getting up, acting crazy. I was that guy, you know what I mean? It was literally foolishness all day, from 7:30, from when we had to line up in the front to when we had to line up to go home. But it's like the class size, and then it's like, man, and it's so funny when you use the term IEP earlier. I was like, yeah, why do I remember that term? You know what I mean? I remember that term, and I was wondering about the acronym, and I remember and I remember at a time where I guess I was acting hyper, crazy. I was put on
disengaged.
Ritalin, put on Ritalin, and I remember that they wanted to put me into Miss Routen's class, and everybody knew Miss Routen's class because that's the class with 5 people in it, So naturally, I'm not going there. So now that goes in the factor of, yo, I'm skipping school now. They try to I'm not going in that class.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it threw in so many factors where it was, I feel like, bro, I feel like I was ushered into failure after failure in school. You know what I mean? I feel like it was a nonstop train of people just passing me off to, yo,
what's really interesting about what you just said, and I don't want to, derail the conversation, but you brought up Miss Routen's class. And for those watching, I went to the same elementary school. So as soon as he said Miss Routen's class, like it was a person and a teacher that I completely forgot. But as soon as he said it, like I knew what it was. And it's so interesting. Like I'm listening to you, and it's like, Miss Routen's class was the class where the special ed kids went. And they like 5, maybe 7, 8 kids are in that class. And that was the class that you don't want to be in. And it's so interesting that they get the attention that we all, I mean, ultimately, yeah, we all deserve as students who didn't decide to be born, didn't decide that they wanted to get in it. You know, like, we're forced to go to school. So if we're forced to do this, then why aren't we getting the attention that we deserve in only certain segments? And it's like, it's really interesting to look at it that way, because it's like, I don't want to be in that class because that's where the slow kids are, but they're getting the attention that we should be getting for the education that we need to make it in this world. You know,
I think that's a misconception from a special ed perspective. Special education isn't about being less than other students. It's just about an identified area of need. And
elementary kid doesn't know that.
Right, and that's what I'm saying though.
This is where the education of the parent comes in, because it has to be fully understood that, let's just say, Kenny, you needed a smaller class setting. It's okay if you did. In that intentional instruction that Ms. Barnes was able to give you, she was not operating out of equality, she was operating out of equity. She was giving you what you needed, and she was giving Jessica what she needed, and she was giving Tommy what he needed, but it may not have all been the same need. It might have gotten you all to the same destination, but it wasn't all the same, because she may have had to keep you extra busy because you were hyper. And there are gift teachers in this industry that actually have a gift for engaging students such as that in a gen ed classroom. But then there are students who have disabilities that extend beyond a gen ed classroom, because now their disability keeps the average or the gen ed student from learning, because he or she is tapping all day or turning around in circles or just having echolalia, just repeating things constantly. And there needs to be a safe place for them to learn as well. So we want every student to be in the least restrictive environment based on their needs. And so the misconception about special ed, and I think this is, honestly, I'm just going to say it in the Black community, is the stigma of, I don't want my child to be labeled as special ed. And what I find in the other communities is that their children get the funding, they get the assistance and the resources they need, because they do away with that pride and that social stigma. They do what's best for their children. And so a lot of times we will say it's about finances, it's about the resources. No, sometimes it's just about us. And sometimes we as parents and educators, we can't move ourselves out of the way to do what's best for our children. And so honestly, as an educator, as a mother, if my child is in need of special education services, I want the whole ante. I want the kit and the caboodle. I want the special ed para. I want the one-on-one, whatever it is that's going to ensure that my child is successful, I want it. But socially, her class was a stigma. You said immediately you remembered that was where all the special ed kids went. But guess what? Have you ever known? I know several special ed gifted students. How about that? Yeah. He has special ed is not just about learning disabilities. Mm-hmm. Special ed could have been just about behavior. So here you have a child who is oppositionally defiant, but gifted. So he goes to the gifted class for a day with the gifted students, and then he got to go back to his special ed class because he can't control his temper. But either way, he's not a misfit. He's not that he can't be successful in society. It doesn't say he can't go to college. It's not saying he can't play football. It's just saying that his learning style, like Kenny alluded to earlier, what was your learning style? He said he didn't learn his learning style until he was an adult, but he wasn't learning his learning style until he was forced to learn, right? So he was in a situation where learning was his only vice. How do I change me? I gotta educate me better. I gotta know more. So when you think about it, Kenny, in your business, right? We go back to standardized testing just a little bit, right? In your business, can you vary? Are there some very specific things that you must know in order to effectively and efficiently carry out your business?
course.
And those are the standards that we have to address. So our curriculums, the basic skill curriculums, serve as those basic standards, but they're not the end all and begin all. They're just the standard, the minimum requirement that students will need in order to what? To learn. It is
I have a
not
question
that,
for you. Not to cut your wisdom. Not to cut your wisdom. I wish I could agree with that. And I understand that in theory. But my personal experience, I was a straight F student. Not a B, C, D, C, D, straight Fs.
Mhm.
Back to back to back. Why was I passed? How did I get out of elementary school? How?
Let me ask you the first question. And it would have to be a very personal question, but
Straight Fs.
did anyone suggest retaining you?
I don't. I would have thought that anybody who had access to the grades would have said it. Like,
But
a
listen,
straight F.
you have to understand the
Like-
school system, unfortunately, as much as people believe this, I, the educator, cannot retain you without parental consent. So I don't care if you got straight Fs all your life. If your
Which I did.
If your parent said, no, he's not going to stay back. No, he can do better.
Okay.
And if your parent also knew that your straight Fs wasn't any indication of your academic ability, but just of your defiance of learning, then they may have decided, you know what, he'll get it after a while. He'll get it eventually. But guess what? Social promotion is gone. Parental rights trump social promotion. Every day. Like I told you, that little boy that passed that test, but I had retained him on paper already before he even took the test. I said, he can't go. He passed the test, and guess what? His mom said, oh, he's going. So again, were your Fs, ask yourself the question, were your Fs really an indication of your academic ability or of your personality at that moment in time?
I mean, I don't even know. I couldn't even answer that at this point.
And then here's another piece that most of us don't look at in the education piece is the SEL component. That social emotional learning, that is paramount. Because here's the thing, do we tap into why Kenny was tapping on the desk? Do we ever ask ourselves why he was acting a fool from 7 to 3:15? Did anybody ever ask him why he was so angry? Because here's the thing, and this goes to some of your points about workload of the teacher. The teacher not only has to teach, she now has to be the counselor, the mentor, the auntie, the coach, right? The surrogate mom, right? He or she is now incorporating all of these roles because we have to not just teach the academic brain of the child, we gotta teach the whole child, the heart, everything. And so if you've never, not you per se, but if a child has never been taught how to be empathetic, sympathetic, even consider somebody else other than themselves, then that's something I got to teach. That's not on the curriculum. That's not in the content, but it's essential in order for me to have effective management in my classroom.
Yeah, and one of our Twitch viewers, Carissa Arella, was saying how important social emotional learning is. That's definitely
Absolutely.
not really addressed too much. But Don, what'd you add?
Yeah, and I hate to cut it off because there's so many gems being dropped. I'm just loving sitting back and listening. Yeah. But we do have a lot of comments that are coming through, which shout out to our Twitch viewers and Facebook viewers as well. The comments is going crazy. It's hard to keep up. But I kind of wanted, and you guys have been touching on this and then jumping off and jumping off. I want to get to the teacher aspect and how teachers are affected. But before we get to that, we had a question, and one of our Facebook viewers kind of hinted at this as well. But Visionary Steve O, shout out to you. He asked, what do we do about what's taught opposed to what needs to be incorporated for a better quality of life? As far as we have a set amount of things that we learn in school that we're supposed to learn that are deemed essential, but then there are things about how do you write checks? How do you save credit scores, things like that, as soon as we get out of college, all of a sudden we're hit with all this stuff and we're like, man, no one ever told me anything about this. How much of a role does our education system have in that versus how much of a role should just our families have in
think-
those life skill settings? Go ahead,
I
David.
think one of the things, if like in the ideal situation, I think it's a little bit of teachers, a little bit of parents, because like I know one thing that in regards to providing services this year for some of my students who are strictly in the virtual learning environment, like I can't require my parents to give like services to my students when they're at home. I can do the best I can, but it's like there's some stuff that like if parents can, it's great, but like I agreed to do that. So I think that there's when the team works great, and for the record, when I use the word team, I'm thinking of an IEP team, which is me, my admin, a gen ed teacher, and the gen ed teachers, and then the parent, because the parent's the most important. And something to note, at least in Virginia, when I talk about the team, they always put the parents first. So I think the responsibility is like, I need to provide the student with all the skills that I can. The parents need to provide all they can. Where it is has to be mixed. You know, my school, we had some finance stuff, but the person that taught me how to do taxes was my dad, sitting me down and walking me through it. Which was probably one of the bigger fights in our family, because it was I have a learning disability as well, and following instructions for me is a struggle. So when taxes are like fill in line 5 on line 5, I'm like, 5 goes in 5, right? He's like, yes, I told you 5 times. All right, where does line 6 go? It's like, take a guess. Line 6? And you know, because I didn't want to get audited at age like 19. That would suck. So I think there is a lot more that schools are offering than a lot of people realize. I also think there's a lot more programs cut through the budgets than people realize as well, where it's, you know, I see a lot of folks on Facebook saying, why didn't they teach us this? Why don't they have an economics class? Why don't they teach us personal finance, blah, blah, blah. But like Campbell County, Virginia, everyone takes an economics class. And that's been going on for the past few years. And I've seen a couple of my friends who have graduated, not friends, like former students of mine that I've taught from marching band, that we connected on Facebook later, sharing stuff like that. And it's like, you took this class. I know you're in this class because there's a couple kids on my caseload that are in that class. So I know that's there. So I think in some cases it's it's being provided, but I think that there's a lot of kind of like Kenny was saying, there's like a lack of love of learning when I get to certain points, because I at least I see, to me, when I'm a new teacher trying to figure out what I want to do with that love of learning, of being able to learn skills like how to do finances, how to do stuff like that, comes from we don't really get to truly help kids understand how they learn individually. That's something I try and do with my students. Campbell County, Virginia is doing the hybrid model of 2 days in school a week, 3 days at home. There's a couple kids that I've requested from them to come a third day. And when I did that, I made sure to sit them down beforehand. I went like, look, you have C's and D's and a lot of F's. Like, you're not dumb. You're not anything. And I think that you struggle here. And I want to help this out. I don't doubt your abilities here. I just want to help this one thing out. And I've seen a lot of my students, when I've sat them down and talked them through where they struggle, not why, just the where. And it's like, okay, how can we fix this one thing? And putting ownership on them. And then more importantly, having their parents have my back. And now we have a full team with the student involved. I'm finding, at least in my experience, good success, even down to marching band stuff. I had a girl get a concussion a couple of years ago. And after she got cleared, she tried to hop back on the field and she felt dizzy one day. She wouldn't go off the field. And I went over to her mom and very panically went, you need to get your daughter off the field. You know, she's like, she almost got hit again. And I don't want to lose her for a season because she just got a concussion. And when we had that team and that trust, the mom went, yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for reaching out. And the mom went over, yelled at the kid for not listening to the instructor. And I felt kind of good because she was a little like dizzy on a 95-degree day. And I'm like, get off my field. Please don't pass out. We make them strong in Campbell. They're very stubborn, but strong. But yeah, so I think like it's when I have that full team, and that, I guess like the part I play in that is like, I've got to make the parents want to trust me. You know, I work, my caseload has a high percentage of like people of color. And when I'm coming at them as a white male from Liberty University, the private school in the area, where a lot of people, I try to hide that because politics in my area sucks, and Tom can agree to that. And so there's a lot of things where I know the role that I play in some of my mom and dad's minds where like I have to go earn their trust sometimes doubly because they've had a sped case manager just kind of pass them along. They've had another person do that. And so to me, I put a lot of stock in getting that family relationship. And so to get to those things like Dom's saying of how to get these finance classes as a middle school teacher, I just want my kids to want to learn. I don't care if they get A's and B's. I care if they pass their stuff, and I care if they learn how to do that. So when they get to those classes, they can actually be aware of what's happening and also just not be afraid to say like, hey, I struggle with this. So there's like, I didn't mean to derail the question because it's one of those, I hear people use that as a lot. And I think it's an excuse for they miss something and they feel bad that they missed it. And they kind of want to take it out on someone, and yelling at a teacher is pretty easy. And also just since I'm here, shout out to the Alta Vista admin team who's doing a very good job of Ron Profit, Jeff Sanders, Kristen John doing a very good job of like shielding us in a year where it's very easy to yell at teachers and giving us professional developments and always encouraging us that like we are doing the best we can. And we want to make sure that we don't lose kids this year. Like I got to say, I like a lot of this, I'm quoting more of them than I am my ideas. I got to shout them out because they've been fantastic, especially in our community, which is a triple failed factory town, but people still think we got a lot of money, but we don't. Kids sleep on dirt floors sometimes. And so it's wild where I'm at.
Yeah.
Just to speak back to what you were talking about, to those real world application courses, you're going to see as you look into, especially in our high schools, in our middle schools now more so, and I'm specifically speaking about Georgia, but we have what we call a career pathway. Our fifth graders engage in a career portfolio as a conclusion of their fifth grade year. So that's a requirement that's through our counseling department that all of our fifth graders complete a career portfolio.
Mhm.
So sixth grade for my county.
In our career portfolios, the students are required to research that interest them, right? You know, when they look about, you ask little kids, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a policeman. You know, and so those are some of those things. But what we learned over the last, let's say, decades, that our kids are kind of disconnected in what the education, how the education connects to those desires, right? And so as an academic coach, I used to engage in many parent workshops. And one of the things we used to talk about with the parents was this: if your daughter or son is saying, I want to be a doctor, but hates math, that's a conversation. If your child says they want to be an astronaut, but doesn't like science, that's a conversation. And so a lot of times we are misleading possibly educators, parents, society alike, where we encourage students to want to be these things, but we don't inform them of what is required for that to happen. Okay. Mm-hmm. Working with some young ladies, the young ladies at Spelman College in the early 90s, early 2000s, it was really, really interesting because these young ladies come with a plan. They have a 5-year plan planned out after college. They know exactly what law school, what medical school they want to go to because they've done the research and know what needs to happen in the undergraduate sector, right, in order for them to complete that professionally. And so probably the late 80s, early 90s, things like work tech just disappeared out of the schools, right? Where you were able to go and learn automotive or HVAC. These are the skill sets that are necessary for our world to work. But we don't really encourage our kids to be a mechanic now, do we? We don't say, hey, come on, own your own body shop, okay? We don't say, you know what, why don't you change air conditioning units for a living? Because they don't see that as a profitable field to go into, right? Yeah. It sounds more prestigious to say, I want to be a lawyer. But then you have to think about how many of them actually will make it to law school. Every little boy I know wants to be a major league football player, right? But only one out of how many are actually ever going to even make it to the draft, less more make it to the league and survive past 5 years. So we as a community of, I say it takes a village, as a learning community, have to educate our children about what it takes in order to achieve those things. So when we talk about learning how to, balance your checkbook or file your taxes or even fill out a form at the doctor's office. See, what we often confuse is there's a difference between education and schooling, okay? And so we are educators and we impose education. Schooling happens from the village. Okay, you get schooled from your grandmother and your great grandmother who have no education. You understand? So they're teaching you life lessons and values and be able to wash the dishes and your clothes, but they have a third grade education. So it has absolutely nothing to do with formalization of education on those things that we're talking about, like changing the oil on your car. Every young man needs to know, every young woman needs to know where the dipstick is. These are some things that are not taught in the curriculum because that's a part of schooling and not education, formal education. Now, let's say you want to be on the automotive track, you might know more or less about a car than others, but the truth of the matter is the content is just priming the brain to learn. It is not telling you that everything you will ever learn happens in K-12. It's not happening. Actually, everything you learned in kindergarten. I bet you if I asked you right now to recite your ABCs, you do it. Why? You didn't learn that in 12th grade, did you? No, you learned it in kindergarten. If I asked you to sing a song like The Wheels on the Bus, you'd be able to sing it even now. But guess what? You didn't learn that in the 11th grade economic class. You learned it in kindergarten. So basically what education does, formal education, it just primes the brain to learn other things. Okay?
Okay, so I have a question for you, because I understand that, but what you're saying is the school is responsible for the education and then the village handles the schooling. And if that is what's happening, it's safe to assume that it's happening in cycles. So like the same way that I was schooled by my village and educated by my school, my parents and their parents and so on were schooled. So where is the learning of these things actually happening if these programs don't exist? And what if the parents aren't engaging in schooling? Because right. That's something that obviously has to happen, you know.
And this is where you'll see the implementation of what we call now parent liaisons. This is a federally funded position that many schools have incorporated in their Title I plans, where they actually have a parent liaison. Right now in this pandemic, in this virtual environment, my teachers, I tell them every day, you are educating your students through your parents. You're actually having to teach mom how to log into the Zoom in order for her to ensure that Tommy gets in every day.
Working Canvas.
There's a learning curve.
Telling a parent how to do Canvas is the worst, okay. But I like it.
There's a learning curve there.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand that when I tell you the workload of the teacher is heavy, right? Because now our teachers in this virtual environment are not just teaching the kids, they're teaching the parents too. So the parent liaison position was necessary because, like you said, Charles, we had to bridge the gap between the parents that didn't do that part, the parents that weren't schooling. Sometimes we have to educate the parents, prime them for learning so that they can do the schooling. And that's one of the things when I think one of your points was about, kind of labeling children, right? Judging children. Mm-hmm. One of the things as a teacher, I did not say was, I know your mama taught you better. That's a really bad assumption because I don't know that his mother taught him better. I don't know that his mother knew better. I don't know that his mother's mother knew better. Again, I can only meet him where he is. And so it's at that moment, 7:15 to 3:15, it's my responsibility to be the better. And hopefully in my communication with the parent, because it's the home and school working together, right? In my communication with mom, I help to make her better. We're comfortable to be vulnerable to me so that we can work through whatever the issues are. So back to what you said, Dom, those things are in place. Career pathways are being implemented into state curriculums across. Actually, students are actually graduating from high school with certification in nursing and accounting, and bookkeeping, and agricultural science. They're actually earning some college credit for those particular areas, but they're very intentional. And guess what? The students get a chance to choose their career pathway. So if you want to be a nurse, guess what? You go into the health tech career pathway. And every class you take is in preparation for that next step. Same thing with agricultural science, whether it be business. And so you're now seeing more and more school systems integrating those career pathways so that our students are getting that specialized training sooner. You have dual enrollment, which is another opportunity to have that specialized training on a higher level as far as college preparation. More and more of our students are coming out of high school already with an associate's degree that was pretty much free to them based on their academic ability. So there are some things in place across the nation that we're starting to become more progressive as it pertains to exposing our students to those life skills. I would love to see home ec come back into the building. We have so many kids that are home that need to learn how to cook for themselves. I mean, that would be great. But
I tell you what, in home ec, I remember, and I don't want to derail, but the only thing I really remember about home ec was making oatmeal chocolate chip cookies, but they were fire. They were some of the best cookies I ever had to date.
But look now, you cook all the time now. You cook as a business. Right? So whatever that spark was, whether it was just teaching you how to measure out the amount of oatmeal or whether it was the milk, again, we have to also think about those skill sets that you learn by working side by side with your parents. How many of you have actually cooked in the kitchen with your parents? How many of you have actually sat with your moms or dads while they did bills? I remember having a very, very transparent conversation with my son when he thought that all I had to do was swipe the card. Right? And I kept saying, you can swipe the card, but it doesn't mean that there's something there. So he sat with me and we did the bills. And when he saw the red, he realized that that's a negative. We short. We're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul. And that whole concept, but that was a schooling moment, but it didn't happen at school. It happened at home, sitting side by side with the parents. And so that's something that we just have to be responsible. That the accountability piece has to be all of us, home and school and community working together.
I guess something also just to clarify as well for those that don't know on the SPED side specifically, one I'll add, like it's difficult to get services. And so those that have it, especially for some of the behavior things and on the spectrum, when a kid turns 14, they start receiving something called transition services. I just had a bunch of them I wrote, and basically what they do for those, if let's say someone has ASD and is on the spectrum, and they lack social skills very well, or these something's called soft skills, something I'm writing into their IEP, which for those that didn't know the term, individual education, can't remember if it's program or plan. I've heard both, but basically it's the legal document that for kids that need help, gets them through high school. What are the plan stands for? Plan and program. I write them. That's all I know. But transition is part of it that like is legally required. That like I just gave a couple. It's like, what do you want to do? I got one kid. It's like, I want to be a graphic designer. I'm like, okay, cool. Here's colleges that have it. Here's here's some of the lingo to learn of it. Here's how to talk to people. And back to, it said some things for those in the spectrum. I've worked with some students, as we said, they learn black and white. They talk black and white. They will see it's like, hey, can't come to work today, won't be there, as like an effective way to talk to somebody because they're like, I said everything I needed to. It's like, no, that's how you get yourself fired. That's rude. So like I got some students like, I'm just practicing how to send emails. I'm practicing their signature. I'm practicing like, this is how you talk to somebody. This is how you make eye contact with a boss. Because some of these disabilities, when they're more the social disorders, they really, these kids struggle and are it's like how to like, or even just how to have an 8-hour job, you know, and like how to be there and be patient for it. There's a lot of stuff in Virginia that I work more middle school. So I apologize. I can't remember any of the local agencies around here. Nicole Trevel, Dom and I marched with her. She does a lot in that stuff because she also works with the adaptive, which the adaptive is the more more restrictive environment of students that like low incidence autism, nonverbal, as we're starting moving to things as well as like, who's going to live with these kids once they graduate? Because are they going to stay with their parents? Can they be independent? So at least there are a lot more ways that public schooling is helping kids out, which honestly is more than private school. Because for private school, for me, I learned disability. Dom knew me my freshman year, and I was like a bat out of hell, had no idea what the hell I was doing, if anything. I had very poor social skills, didn't know how to talk to anybody, barely knew how to do an email. All I knew how to do was say, yes, man, yes, sir, and pretend to be polite. But like, I lost so many friends and burned so many bridges for professors because no one sat me down and talked me through it. That like, I love that I get to help some kids. I was like, this is how not to email a professor. Oh, how do you know that, Mr. Keller? Well, here's the 9 emails I yelled at a professor about something and got almost kicked out of a class. So it's there. I like that that is there for our sped kids that do struggle with even little things, just like how to, understanding that a card might run out of money, how to budget, how to write stuff down, how to not forget. So I'm very encouraged that there are a lot of things in place for some people that are struggling that hopefully we'll see less struggle moving forward.
Yeah, that's what's up. And I like that both of you guys brought up Village. Because I used to work as a day treatment technician. Y'all have day
Love
treatment
day
in Georgia,
treatment
don't
folks.
you?
They're
Yeah,
awesome.
y'all know day treatment. One of the most important things was that contact with the parent was, okay, I'm doing this here in the classroom, but you also have to do it at home. If you don't do it at home, I only see them 6 hours a day. They live their whole life with you. If you don't do it, it's not, my job is pointless. And so it's interesting that you said that because it really does make sense that that goes in every facet. Yes, I can teach you math here at school. When you go home, they got to teach you how to use that math to budget, how to use that math to make bank accounts and keep track of your money. So it does make sense that it all comes full circle and it's a group effort. But
A really
getting,
interesting day. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's a really interesting day when you're on good terms with the parents. A question I'll ask their struggling student a lot when I get to talk to parents on my caseload. It's like, what's some verbiage you use? What's some body language that works well with you? And like, I had a kid that like, he still hates my guts. And like, I never could win him over, but his mom gave me some tips on how to get him to just like talk to me. And it was simply just like not making eye contact. And so like one day I just said what I need to say and I just didn't look at him and he just did it. And all of a sudden it was kind of interesting because like we started he went from like pure angry hate to like he could stand me, but like I only got there because the parent or like little things like a kid's acting up and like, hey, how do you like get your kid to like pay attention? It's like, I just say this and I quoted their mom. They're like, how'd you get that? I'm like, yeah, I just figured it out. And like, it's like, then like I have a good relationship with the parents, the kids start liking it better. Cause I don't know. That's the tool I use a lot. So whenever something goes wrong, I just call a parent, be like, hey, what would you do in this situation? Cause then it also puts ownership back on the parents and it makes them feel like they're involved in the kid's classroom as well. Cause like I'm asking a parent, how do they talk to their own kid? And I want to change my verbiage for that kid to be more individualized in my approach.
yeah, that's that teamwork. It's that teamwork. So closing out, because we run out of time, I want to bring up our last point, but I want to use as our final thought and then revisit it in one of our videos during the week. And we've spoken a lot about the student aspect of education. That's been most of our focus of how does everything we're talking about correlate to the student. But I want to touch on the teachers just in our final thought. Teachers have tremendous workloads this year more than ever, probably. They get love. They don't always get the love they deserve. And we don't always understand how stressful of a job it actually is. So, in our final thoughts, and for those of you who don't know, final thoughts are the end of our episode where everybody gets 1 minute to say their piece before we close things out. So, for final thoughts today, I want to know from you guys what is something that you feel we can do to ease the stress from our teachers' jobs? David, why don't we start with you? Something we could do to ease the stress. 60 seconds, go.
Because Betsy DeVos was mentioned earlier, stop dangling funding like a fret because I'll just use my big boy language. It's not me you're fucking with, it's kids. And when you say things like, if you don't open schools, we won't fund you, you're not just saying, oh, we won't pay you. It's you're telling a kid this next year of learning, which historically tends to be lower income, non-white neighborhoods, we don't care about you and you're fine where you're at. So I would suggest if this next administration do something, fund it. And then next, make sure we're using technology and funding smart. I am super proud of Campbell because when we rolled out our technology for August, we were very smart in how we did it. Like there was a lot of time and a lot of we had like a month, we had teacher work month. We pushed school back for a couple of weeks and took time to how to actually learn it. We still learned on the job and took us about a quarter to get it figured out, but we had a month to get a lot of stuff built. And so we like, all right, this isn't working. We're going to try this instead. So it was constructive. And so like, I guess my big thing is if we're going to fund it properly and don't threaten me with that stuff, because you're not threatening me. You're threatening students. You're threatening other kids' babies that are going to be taxpayers and are going to have jobs. And historically, if you stop pulling funding, those are the kids that end up going in jails. And like from those areas with less funding. And so I want politicians to actually like respect the children enough to not use them as threats, especially for areas they don't care about when their own kids go to private school. So it barely affects them anyway. So just care about my students, please.
Got you. Okay, Kenny.
Sorry for the adult language. Kind of got a little heated there at the beginning.
You good. Kenny?
I think that the biggest thing that we can do, man, I think that funding and all of those things are necessary, but I think that the biggest thing is just going to be a heart check. Having really empathy and understanding for what's going on and being the change that we want to see. You know, we've all spoken about, you know, the teachers and this and that, but, you know, it all starts in the home. And it's like literally the home is affected, then the community, then the city, then the state, you know, so it's just like where us as people, man, our first step is us, the people right here, the people that are watching, just be that change. The kids, the people that we interact with, especially the teachers during this time, the police, anybody that's under a high stress situation, we can talk about, oh, I don't like this and I don't like this. Be the change that you want to see. Be the change that you want to see. Be effective in the change that you're spreading in your community to your friends and family. I feel like that's the only way to really do it. But it starts from the community level, you know, because the education system needs revolution. I know that all of these steps are being done, but it's a lot of Band-Aids because I know 5 kids right now that I had to buy iPads for. You know? Mm-hmm. It's just like, yo, why isn't the school doing this? Mm-hmm. Why isn't, damn, you don't have access? I have one kid right now that I know that they don't have Wi-Fi. So it's just so many gaps. So where it's like now, we can't just place it on the school. We have to place it on that community. It has to be that tribal leadership. It has to be individuals, man, understanding their responsibility. And it just starts with us. It starts with the fact of that your children, I'm gonna treat like my children. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the only way to affect change. But it has to start grassroots. Up top, the money's gonna go through 30 hands before anyone. We know this, you know, because power is what it is. But once we effectively start changing, look at what Jesus did, man. Started with 12. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know?
Yeah, I feel that. Okay, Miss Lakeisha, what do you think?
I would want the community to feel the heart of the teacher. Education is a female-dominated industry. I just want to be perfectly clear that the majority of educators are teachers, and many of them are mothers. So in this pandemic, I just want you to envision for a moment the fact that not just your children are at home, their children are at home too. And they're still required to have an accountability to make sure that they show up every day and make sure that they're giving quality instruction to your child. And then just sitting right next to them or in another room is their children. And the same support that we're asking of our parents to give to our scholars, they too have to be that support to their own children in the same. Okay. So I think I would like to see more respect for the position. A lot of times people say, oh, you teach, you get the summers off. Really, our summers are just all the bathroom breaks we never got to take, all the lunches we never got to eat. And so all the many nights of planning on the weekends, a time that we took from our families to make sure that we were ready for your children. And so when I say home and school working together, that can't be more of a point. I really agree with Kenny in saying that it's going to start with the community. We are a district, I can only speak for my own district, but we are 100% virtual. We've been 100% virtual since March 13th. We probably will continue to be virtual all the way to the end of the school year. Many don't agree. However, we have a progressive board and a superintendent that says the safety and security of our teachers and students alike are important. It's about the students, but the teachers have to be whole in order to give the students their absolute best. And so it's always good to see when the community rallies. Next Thursday, I will be giving out probably 300 book bags of school supplies. It's not the beginning of the school year, but we know that school supplies have probably dwindled at this point, and we need to re-up. And so we just need to be conscious of all that we are all going through together, and that we embrace this opportunity to become a connected entity where we can do anything that we come together as when we come together, we can do anything. And our children are our children. But guess what? Like Kenny said, your child sits next to my child. So my child having and your child not having is an impact on my child. So when we look at what needs to happen across our communities, we have to be proactive and reactive. And we have to put our work in service where our mouth is. We can talk about it all day. But the truth of the matter is, the heart of the teacher is with your children, and the heart of your children is with you. And so we're all working for the same thing. And I tell my teachers all the time, the parents don't keep the good ones at home. They send you their very best every day. And our goal is to take them how they came and send them better than they came. And so I think that if we do that as a community, we're going to be successful. Even through this pandemic, we're going to be successful when we all collectively work together, home, school, working together for academic achievement of our students.
Yeah. And I don't even have too much to say for my final thoughts. 'Cause
Right.
the three of y'all pretty much hit exactly how I
Preaching.
feel. You know, I agree with Keller that there is some top-down stuff that has to happen. My wife is a teacher, and so I absolutely understand that there's some administrative, like government type stuff that affects you, and it would help if that stuff was in order. But then at the same time, there's also parents, there's also the community, there's also the people that you see every day, the people that send those people to you, that I feel like also, like you said, have to have some more respect for you and maybe some more understanding of what you do on a day-to-day basis, so that when they approach you about something, they can approach you from the mindset of, I know this is hard for her or him. I'm not going to go and jump down their throat. Of course, we still got to talk, but I'm going to do it in a respectful way because I respect your position. Yeah, that's all I got, Charles.
So thank you all. Y'all have all three shared some very awesome insight and perspective.
Thank you for having us, by the way.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So Kenneth, you said it a lot, and Keisha, you brought it up, and I really enjoyed it. You know, the whole it starts with us. That's kind of like our motto here at the World Can Wait, and it kind of started because one day I got tired of seeing a video of a Black person being killed by police, and I was like, man, this needs to change. And then it hit me like, well, what can I do? I can start with me, like, and just having these conversations, maybe it'll help, right? And so I think that recognizing that it starts with you and with those around you is the first step, right? But then, you know, we talk about the wholeness of the teachers, and we talk about the village that the people have. And I think, you know, to go back to Keisha's point earlier, where a child that says they want to be an astronaut but doesn't like science, like, yo, we need to have a conversation. I think that we need to better prepare our teachers for being teachers. And, you know, listening to you, Lakeisha, and listening to you, David, it's like, that wasn't my experience with teachers, right? Like that wasn't my experience, where it was like, I understand that this is what this child is coming with. And maybe I don't know the full backstory, but I know that this child is just a little human being that's coming with all these other things.
Right.
Let me engage with the parents in this way. And so, you know, one of our Twitch users even brought it up. And who was it that brought it up? Make Art with Mackie was talking about properly vetting our teachers. I think that if we properly vet our teachers, make sure that they have that desire to actually engage with the families. and we understand that there's going to be bad days, you know, but that bad day has to be understood as something that can't come with you to the job. Like Kenneth said, there's certain jobs where having a bad day just isn't, it ain't going to cut it, you know, so I think that the more we better prepare our teachers, the easier it becomes for them to manage the workload, because they know I have to engage with this parent, I have to engage with each individual student where they're at and meet them, rather than just saying, we need teachers. And then people are signing up for the job because it's a steady paycheck, right? And then that's where you find the people that don't care. So I think us as a community, as a society, better educating and preparing our future educators is going to help mitigate the workload for teachers. That's, I believe that. And
I just
so,
want to
yeah,
add to that thought.
yeah, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I know we're closing because you said something that I really just want to highlight from my school.
I say a lot of profound things.
Good principals make good teachers for good buildings. Kristen John is the Rolodex for like the entire Alta Vista community, and as well as like the good teachers can help figure it out. Like our band director has been up a lot of areas, and when I got there, whenever I have a question of a kid or a parent, I go to Kristen first, and then if the kid's in band and I want some more information about that, I can go to Mario. Like knowing which parent to email, how to do stuff like that. Like it's just doing it is one thing, but then knowing how to do it properly, that's something I think that our building does very well. That like at least as a first year teacher learning how to do this long term, I am super satisfied because my principals have set a very good example. So I did not know how to do this as of 6 months ago. So a lot of this is on them, and I can tell that your elementary school is set up pretty well because like I'm hearing a lot of the same things, same strains, just like, yeah, that is exactly how to do it. And it's whenever a principal walks the walk, it makes it very easy for us teachers to follow, and it makes it very good for parents to follow them as well. And you know, our area is struggling. It's really hard to see. A lot of kids are failing, but like I'm still hopeful moving forward, as she said, just because like I look to my principals and none of them are scared. And it makes me like the world's on fire. I don't know what's going on, but I feel confident that we're going to make it to the end of the year. So
yeah, one of the things that I say a lot and I really love and I really believe, and the more y'all follow this page, you'll hear me say it more. Leadership is always the problem and it's always the answer. When you can look to your leader and see a steady hand at the wheel, you feel comfortable. You're ready to go. You're like, yo, it is crazy, but he's not panicking and he's running this whole thing. So we good, you know, but
yeah,
thank you all for tuning in. We love having this conversation with our guest. We love the engagement in the comments. It's been really dope growing with you all. I'm going to close us out in some prayer, and we're going to, be back during the week with some more conversations and back next week with another episode. Jesus, we just thank you for this opportunity to have some conversation and really get some new perspectives. I personally learned things that I didn't know before, and I just hope and pray that other people did as well. And I pray that this conversation would reach everywhere that you've called it to reach, and that it would affect the change that you've created it to affect. And I just pray that this platform would be something that's continued to be used for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen, amen.
All right.
Yeah.
Dom, you got any final things for you?
Yeah, just if you're not already following us, thanks for tuning in tonight. Make sure you follow us everywhere at this point: Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, everywhere. Yeah. And like Charles said, we're going to be back next weekend for another episode, but we're also going to be back during the week. So stay tuned for more. Y'all be blessed. Have a good night.